Hello, welcome everyone. Great that you're here. My name is Jakob Freund. I'm co-founder CEO of Camunda, and with me here is Daniel, VP Engineering. Daniel, are you actually here?
I'm actually here and alive and kicking. Hi, Jakob.
Cool, thanks. All right. So, yeah, as I said, welcome. This is about Camunda, the Camunda BPM platform in its version 7.8 that we have released yesterday. So we want to give you an update about that. And for all of you who are actually just getting their feet wet with Camunda, also there's a general introduction about what the company is about, what the product stack is about, what you can use it for, some typical case studies, things like that. So this is what you can expect from today's webinar. And before we get going, just a few housekeeping rules. So what you can do is during the webinar, ask questions already. There is a little questions window on the right-hand side. So you can just type in your questions there, more or less like in a chat window. And we will probably cover them at the end of the session in the Q&A session. So please feel free to ask us whatever you would like to know about Camunda. Also, you can expect the slides to be shared afterwards, as well as the recording of this webinar. So therefore, you don't need to worry. You don't have to take screenshots or make notes or anything. We're going to share all the content with you afterwards. All right. So that's about it for now. I would say let's get going. So Camunda is a company that is based out of Berlin in Germany. Bernd Rücker and I founded it about 9 years ago already. So we started this as a consulting business from day one, focused on business process management, and pretty soon we figured out that the world needs a better process automation technology, which is when Camunda BPM was born, the software product that we're going to talk about today. We also started a subsidiary in San Francisco, United States, a few years ago already, and also opened an office in Denver. So we are now serving our North American customers, not only with sales services, but also with consulting, support, etc. We are proud winners of BPM Next Awards 2016 and 2017. So in case you don't know it, BPM Next is the conference about BPM software technology innovation happening once per year in Santa Barbara, California. So 2016, we won that award for our DMN decision model and notation technology implementation, and in 2017 for our newest project called ZB, which is about workflow automation at scale. Here in Germany, we also won the Deloitte Technology Fast 50 Award, which means that we are one of the 50 fastest growing technology companies in Germany. Also a thing that we are, of course, very proud of. The Camunda BPM platform is all about workflow and decision automation. So very briefly, in case you're not yet familiar with those concepts, BPMN is a notation, a standard, in fact, that allows you to design flows in symbols that are easy to read and understand, at the same time also directly executable. So what we're looking at here, in fact, is source code. And just a few examples. Here we can see a service task. A service task means that the workflow engine, in this case Camunda, will call an API service, for example, or it will let a microservice know that there's work to be done. Can also happen in the subscribe fashion, for example, publish subscribe fashion. Another example here is this nice little business rule task, make decision. So this already brings us to the DMN standard, which is also part of the Camunda platform. So we have a decision execution engine that is, for example, able to execute decision tables, like in this neat example here, and can be used standalone entirely, but also can be used in conjunction with the BPMN workflow engine, so they're nicely integrated. Then, of course, in BPMN, we have certain flows, and we have certain situation where we might route the process, like with this exclusive gateway here, and then it might be the case that a user is supposed to work on the task. Therefore, we will assign that task to the respective user, and they can, look at it in their task list, inbox, whatever, complete the task. The process will continue. Or we might, for example, wait for a message that is supposed to come in. Could be, in fact, the service that we have called earlier in the process, for example, or any other external source of message that we're waiting for. So this is, as I said, just the tip of the iceberg of the potential use cases. We have customers who do pure service orchestration, fully straight through processing without any user interaction. We have other customers who are more or less already in a case management situation with lots of user tasks. Most of them are actually combining those two concepts, and more are enriching those workflow models with decision DMN models in order to route the decision flow. All right, so the Camunda stack itself consists of certain components. At its core, it's about those two engines, the BPMN engine and the DMN engine, that work on various relational databases. There's a Java API as well as a REST API. So if you're not a Java shop, but a .NET shop or JavaScript shop or anything like that, then you can still, of course, leverage Camunda by using that engine and via the REST API. And then we have certain applications such as the Modeler, very easy to use desktop tool that allows business analysts as well as developers to design and edit those models. We have a task list and out-of-the-box web application that allows task workers to look at the tasks, complete the tasks. You can use that task list. You don't have to. So many customers have their own user interface. Instead of the task list, still leveraging, for example, the Cockpit, which is an extremely powerful tool for operations. Also the focus of today's webinar. And admin allows us to not just administrate users and groups, but also grant permissions, authorizations in order to let specific users do specific things, etc. Then here on the right-hand side, we have an actually optional add-on called Optimize. Optimize is a big data reporting, analytics, alerting tool targeting business users like process owners. So with Optimize, I can very quickly get insights about my automated processes. I can see heat maps. I get reports about average duration, for example, cycle times. I get alerts if things take too long, and all that kind of stuff. So because we're often in big data situations, Optimize is distributed with an Elasticsearch, loosely coupled with a relational database. So this is how we handle that. Okay, that's the stack. That stack is mostly open source. However, especially the Cockpit is way more powerful in the enterprise platform. So there's a certain correlation. As soon as you want to automate mission-critical core business processes, you have certain requirements regarding operations tooling, and this is where the enterprise Cockpit kicks in. And as I said, Optimize an optional add-on, therefore also available with the enterprise platform only. That stack is used by lots of organizations worldwide, many using the open source stack, more than 170 paying us for the enterprise platform across all industries. So we have many customers in the finance industry, in insurance, telco, media, e-commerce, and others. And what's interesting also for today's webinars, one use case from 24-Hour Fitness. So if you happen to be in the US, you probably know them, at least if you like working out. So they're the, in fact, the biggest fitness center chain worldwide. So therefore they have lots of processes, obviously, and they're using Camunda. And Daniel, you just happened to be in San Francisco about 2 or 3 weeks ago where they presented the use case. So maybe you can fill the audience in about what they're actually using Camunda for.
Yeah, sure. So we had a community day in San Francisco a couple of weeks back, which was actually our first community day in San Francisco. We had one in New York, I think, at the beginning of the year, but this was the first one in San Francisco, and it was really nice to meet up with our, like people from the West Coast who are using Camunda. And 24-Hour Fitness presented their use case. It was Jimmy Floyd presenting solution architect at 24-Hour Fitness, and they internally use Camunda for large-scale orchestration of their core business processes. They run core business processes. They also run many things that traditionally we would classify as workload that ESB would do, so also data transformation and ETL workflows. And it goes from, as far as he filled us in at the community day, it goes from things like I would open a new membership at 24-Hour Fitness, I would cancel my membership, but also more high volume things like inquiring about certain availability of certain things, or I have a complaint about something at a club, and all of that would eventually run through their platform and also run through Camunda. It's completely automated, and what he focused on mainly in the presentation was, on the one hand, of course, the scale of what they do. So the numbers we took away from that is that they do more than 20 million BPMN instances per day, and more than 18 million DMN instances per day, which is a lot of which is quite high volume. What he also focused on, the other hand, is that like the benefits they get from using a BPMN-based solution like Camunda is that they get a lot of visibility into what is going on. So what he told us is that before they were using the BPMN-based solution, they had no visibility into what their processes actually were, because everything was just laid out in code, which is nice, of course, but then you don't have a lot of transparency into what are our processes, what are the steps in there. So if a member cancels, what actually happens, unless you have very, very good documentation, but we all know how much up-to-date documentation always is. The nice thing with BPMN is that the documentation, as Jakob said before, is actually the source code. So what we're looking at in terms of the diagram is always what is also running in the software. This is really nice. The other thing is that while this is interesting in terms of the documentation, it is also interesting in terms of at runtime, looking into flows, looking into what is going on, locating incidents, seeing in a tool like, for example, our Cockpit, that we have certain incidents at a certain step, and then I can go into data, I can inspect what is going on, I can fix them, can run batch processes on this. So I get a lot of operational control over these things, along with the visibility. So these were things he focused on. And then the other thing that was very interesting to them with using a solution like Camunda is the fact that you have a lot of resilience around workflows. So if we have a large, maybe service-oriented architecture, or these days microservice-oriented architecture, we have components designed by different teams. They are available in different versions. They have decoupled life cycles. Sometimes things go wrong, so the wrong data comes in, or a certain service isn't available. BPMN workflow will run up to a certain step, try to call this service. If it doesn't work, it will stop there, and then you can fix the problem and you continue without losing this particular workflow instance. So, for example, without losing this particular membership request in their domain. So this was quite nice, meeting these people in San Francisco. We're going to have more community days also in the US, so stay tuned. If you are in the United States, we're going to be back next year, and then we can look at more of these interesting case studies from our customers.
Awesome, thank you, Daniel. I like that term, microservice-oriented architecture, MSOA. I think you can't say that in a microservices meetup. They're going to burn your life.
Well, I'm actually going to visit a microservices meetup next week. I can try, and then we'll see how it works out.
We still need you here. No, it's funny, but you're totally right. It's fascinating to see that. I have to be careful not to get carried away here, but you know, this technical challenge of integrating systems, integrating services, of course, it's not new, but it's increasingly relevant now that everything's kind of like, you know, it's being digitalized, and so we need technology that steers flows, basically, that you can call that business process or workflows or whatever, but we need that kind of technology, and there's a lot of technology out there, of course. Also things like, you know, message queues used to be a big thing, and enterprise service bus. Nowadays we have technologies such as Kafka and others. However, what Camunda brings in is you know, solving those technical challenges, and in combination with providing real-time visibility about what's going on, even for business users. And this is where Camunda really stands out and fills a gap that no one else is really filling. So yeah, that's part of the secret of our success, I guess. So 7.8 now. We have been working on this for half year. We're pretty good at keeping our schedule, obviously, so we always release at the end of May and end of November. We have never missed that date so far. We do not intend to miss it in the future, and we have been very committed on this new release with more than 30 software engineers nowadays, many contributors outside the Camunda company helping us driving this open source project forward. So thanks a lot for that. And what we have been focusing on this, as you can guess already, is making Camunda even more powerful for that kind of situations. So high volume, mission critical core business processes, as we have seen them at 24-hour fitness. This is where we are ramping up Camunda, where we're honing basically the features and therefore also developing, for example, the engine, the cockpit tooling, and other things for. So this is kind of the keynote really for this update. So yeah, speaking of, the first thing we will look into is the workflow engine's performance, followed by what's new in Cockpit, and also something that all of you who like to use Spring, and especially Spring Boot, will appreciate. But before we do that, let's look at the performance, as I said. So Daniel, what's better now about the workflow engine's performance, really?
Yeah, so I'll try to share my screen now. How do I do that? Here. I think, Jakob, you need to stop sharing yours.
Okay.
Or maybe not. All right, okay, I think we now managed to do that. Thank you very much for your patience. So yes, the workflow engine performance has been improved with the release, and of course this is a technology that has been around for a couple of years now, and we have made many improvements over the past, and I want to walk you through the latest improvement that we have made that are quite significant. I'm going to start with an example of a business process, a BPMN process, and this run right here basically as a start event, and I'm later going to show the results of a benchmark that we've run on different databases. And here, this workflow, we started with a variable that basically has a list of 20 different strings, and like in real life, this could be phone numbers, this could be addresses by different customers, and then the next step is going to iterate over those 20 variables. This is a multi-instance step. So for each item in this list, be it a phone number, be it a customer address, this service is going to be called once. Then after this is done, there's a bunch of more services that are run partially in parallel and partially sequential. The whole thing is a single transaction, so it runs synchronously. And when you run something like this in the transactional workflow engine, as we have it with Camunda, then this communicates to the database, and it needs to do a lot of communication with the database. This communication to the database is the defining factor in the performance. I've made some improvements there. I'm first going to show the impact and then walk you through what exactly has been done, so what is behind it. Now, this now compares how many instances of this workflow we can start in 1 minute, and it compares these blue bars here to the green bars, and the blue bars being the performance of the engine, so how many workflow instances we can run in a minute before the optimization that we have now done with the 7.8 release, and the green bar is the new numbers with the optimization turned on. Now, for example, when we look at Oracle 12 here, we can see Oracle database, we can see that we can do around, I don't know, like 200 process instances in a minute of that, and with the optimization in 7.8, we can now do around 700, which is of course a significant improvement. We see similar ratio in the improvement for IBM DB2, also for Microsoft SQL Server, also very nice improvements for PostgreSQL Server. In our tests, we don't see improvements for MariaDB and MySQL, and this is probably because they don't support the database feature that we're using to do those improvements, which I'm going to walk you through right now. So, as I said, the Camunda engine needs to save the data in a database. This is how it works, and much of the performance comes out of it, how efficient this communication with the database is implemented. Now, when we run a workflow like this, at the end, we're going to insert a lot of data. So, for example, for each variable, there's going to be an insert. For each event in the audit log, tracing the flow through the process. There's going to be different inserts, and the process that we saw actually performs 163, if I'm not mistaken, different inserts to the database. 163. Before 7.8, each of those inserts would be a full round trip to the database. So one insert is executed after the other, and each time it's a full round trip to the database, which can go across the network. So we need to pay the price on the network round trip. And then, of course, the database is going to add some constant penalty on each statement that we execute. The optimization that we have made is very simple, in fact. It now allows the process engine to group inserts and updates and also deletes that go to the same database table into a batch. And then for each batch, the engine only needs to do a single round trip to the database. So for example, here, it would group the first 3 inserts going to the variable table in one batch, and it would group the 2 other inserts going to the variable table, to the audit log table into another batch. Now, instead of doing 6 round trips in my example here, I would then do 2. In the actual example that we looked at before, in the beginning, you would do before the optimization 163 round trips, and after the optimization only 6. This is where the significant performance improvement comes from. It is most significant if we have a lot of inserts, updates, and deletes going to the same table in the same transaction. That can be the case because we use many variables and create many variables in a single step, or update many variables in a single step. It is also the case with history. So we write a lot of audit log, which provides the visibility into flows that we have been talking about at the beginning in the context of the 24-hour fitness example. All of this is a lot of data that's being logged, and making that logging as efficient as possible really allows the engine to run a lot faster. So this is something that we did in this release, and it adds on top of the many performance optimizations that have been done in previous releases. And I'm sure there's going to be some questions about it. We can take them in the end. For now, I would give back to you, Jakob, and we can continue with Cockpit, I think.
All right, yeah. Thank you, Daniel. So coming back to me. All right, yes, Cockpit. So as I mentioned, Cockpit is a web application for process operations. It's key, I would say, in our tool stack because, yeah, as I said, Camunda is being used for mission critical core processes. So we have done a lot of things with Cockpit. A few things I would like to live demo. Especially about so-called batch operations. So why is batch operations important in a nutshell? Well, there's certain things you can do about a single process instance, like, for example, suspending it and reactivating it, which basically means that you freeze it. So it's not going to be continued. And why would that make sense? For example, because you might have some system that is currently down that you would not be able to call from that process instance, so you don't want to let the process instance try it because it wouldn't work anyway. So you freeze it, fix the problem, and once the problem is fixed, you kind of wake the instance up again, like activate it so that it can continue. And so just this example, I mean, yeah, it's great to be able to do that for a single instance, but when we look at examples like 24-hour fitness, executing 20 million of those instances every day, then batch operations might be a thing, obviously. Same is true for so-called modification. I think I will just live demo that. It's basically about being able to change the current status of an instance. And restarting an instance, yeah, it's a bit like the Walking Dead of process instances, which means that, I've completed a process instance, so it's basically, completed, it's done now, it's buried, but for whatever reason, I need to, to wake it up again, I need to, how do I say that in English, really? But, like, it's live again.
I don't know, like reenact it.
Acted, yeah. It's reborn, whatever. But you know what I mean, I guess. So being able to do that for a single instance, good. For millions of instances in one operation, even better, obviously. So let's just try to look at how this works in Cockpit. And I don't have millions of instances right now. I have just 3 in my example, but I think that should get the message across. All right, so let's log in. This is Cockpit. I'm not talking about every single thing that we can see here in Cockpit right now, but what's most relevant for us is that we have 3 process definitions, aka BPM diagrams deployed right now. One is called MQL. It's not really important what this is about, but you can see that it is a process consisting mostly of service tasks, so service orchestration, and then we're calling a decision table in between. And then we have this call activity. So here we are basically jumping into a sub-process. This is what this MQL thing is about. And we have obviously 3 running process instances here. All of them are currently in this sub-process. So I could now, jump to that sub-process in order to see what's currently going on here. All 3 of them are in this user task, but we shouldn't care about that right now. Okay, so let's go back to that dashboard and say, okay, I want to operate a batch operation now. And I could of course do that, based on the process definition. But there's another approach that is even more powerful. I can search for specific process instances, even among, across different definitions based on certain criteria, like variable values, for example, things like that. To keep it simple, I will simply look at those 3 process instances of that MQL process. So they are here right now. And what I could do now is I could execute a batch operation for those process instances. So let's just do that. And let's assume, for example, that I want to suspend them, which is this operation here. So I will pick that operation now. If I simply continue, Cockpit will perform this operation for all instances covered by the filter. So even if it's like 20 million, this is how I can tell Cockpit to do that. If I want to suspend only a specific instance or 1 or 2, I can pick them here. Of course, I can add certain filter criteria and so on and so forth. I will simply suspend those 2 instances for now. So now I have to confirm this, and this is happening asynchronously, which means that, if I have my 20 million again, of course, this might take a while. So this is why I can now observe the progress and see if this is actually working. And in fact, it's done already. So, obviously for 2 instances. So what I can do now is I can have a look at my MQL process again. And what I can see now is that I have those 3 instances that are currently running. However, 2 of them are, suspended or paused. So obviously this has worked. And yeah, I can basically, fix my system now or whatever I might want to do. What I can also do, of course, is I can reactivate those instances, and I can do that either via the batch operation, as I've just demonstrated, but I can also do it for the single process instance, clicking this button here. So now it's reactivated. Which means that it's not frozen anymore. Let me do that for the other one as well, and because I need it for my next demonstration. Okay, so this is the suspension and activation of process instances. Another batch operation, as you have seen, there's actually a few of them. Another batch operation is about what we call process instance modification. It's an extremely powerful feature. So let's jump into this sub-process called lead review. So just doing this here. And we have those three process instances all pending in this user task right now. So let's assume that for whatever reason, this is the wrong place for them to be. Something has happened. I don't know, corrupt data, and the model wasn't well defined. So they are in the status now, and we don't want them to be in that status. So what can we do about it? We can actually move all of them to a different node in the process diagram. Doesn't matter if it's down the line or up the stream, or just another branch. We can just move them anywhere. So what I'm going to do now is I will move them from this user task here, screen MQL, to that other one, check evaluation request. So I can do that by clicking on the Modify tab here and below. And there's different ways to do that really, but one that I like in particular because it's so tangible is I can, in fact, drag and drop them. So again, it's just 3 in this example. It could also be 3 million, just a higher number really in this batch. And I can move them over there. I can confirm that I want to modify all instances covered by the filter right now. that I have defined in this drag and drop fashion. There's some details I can define, like certain IO mappings if I want this to happen asynchronously. Not necessary in this case because it's just 3 instances, so I can simply like see the result immediately, and so on and so forth. So this is how I modified all the process instances at once.
Yeah.
Daniel, yeah?
Well, we should maybe add for users who have been following us over the last years, this was always possible for some releases back for a single instance. And you may have seen this in the past, that for a single instance you could do this drag and drop thing, but now it actually works on large batches of instances, which is the new thing with this release. I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, true, of course, yeah, to make that clear. And again, we had this 24-hour fitness example, but as you can imagine, other customers, for example, from the telco industry, such as AT&T or T-Mobile and others, they have this kind of requirements, obviously. So therefore, we have implemented that batch operation for modification now as well. And what we've also implemented is this Walking Dead thing about completed process instances. I know this is like, it's stuck now with me. I can't help it. So let's just try that out now. And what I can do now is I can say, okay, maybe I just do it for those instances here. So what I can say is, okay, I have 3 running instances right now. Let's use this modification feature in order to complete all of them. So all right, okay, let's just do it. No, that's fine. Okay. So now I have 3 completed process instances. Obviously, they're all here in this end event, so they're buried now, like dead and buried. What I can do now is I can say restart, and restart means that I can pick a flow node in this diagram. So let's say I want to restart them right from the beginning. So I can click on this wrench symbol here, and oops, like this. There we go. And once again, confirm the specific instances. I mean, all of them are the ones that I'm interested in now. And what you're going to see, by the way, is that this operation will complete. However, when we look at the dashboard, we will see that there's now a red state. There's an incident. So there's something, in fact, there's 3 incidents. So something is happening here. So for some technical reason, this restart operation, well, it did work. However, then the process instances could not be actually executed. Could be a data reason or whatever. I did this on purpose because it allows me to also showcase another new feature in 7.8, which is that I can now actually see in the diagram already the number of incidents that have occurred in a certain step. So this, of course, is also a time saver, quite convenient. All right. So, I mean, there's more batch operations, obviously, but I think you get the idea. So let's move on to some more cockpit features that we have implemented with 7.8. One thing, well, yeah, I don't know. I think you wouldn't call it a feature really, but for us, it's very important. And it sounds like something that you would expect from a product like Camunda, but when you look at the market, in reality, you often won't get it. It's a fast rendering of complex BPMN diagrams. And I'm not talking about the diagram that we have seen now. So many of our customers have diagrams that are, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 times larger than the examples that I've showed here, which makes sense if they have, complex end-to-end processes. They don't want to decompose them over several hierarchies because they need them, to be visible end-to-end at a glance. So therefore, they have, I don't know, 50, 60, 80 plus flow nodes in there, like BPMN symbols. And yeah, unfortunately, with Cockpit, this took a while to render. So it took up to 8 seconds in one particular case until it was actually displayed in Cockpit. Of course, this is unbearable, and we fixed that. So now it's still 2 seconds. You can argue that 2 seconds is still 2 seconds too long. However, it's way better than before, and it is way better than anything else that we are aware of, at least in the market. So, so therefore, I think it's noteworthy here. What else can you find in Cockpit? Well, certain things that are just niceties and make life easier. Maybe they're not shiny features, that you would win any like awards with because they're not about AI or machine learning or whatever, but they're actually real world problems. So, for example, many people use JSon and also still XML variables in the process context. This has become way more convenient with Cockpit now, so I can add and edit those variables in a way more comfortable way in Cockpit. When I have my search, I think I did this here as well, so quickly showing that we can search for process instances based on criteria. I think I did it with the MQL example, and here you can see now it's 6 instead of 3 because when we revoke those completed instances, we actually started them as new instances, and therefore we have 6 instances now. And what I can do now here in the search is I can also add more columns that I'm interested in, like for example whatever the definition name, the definition key. I could do this in the past already, but it's nice that those columns are now actually persisted, which means that when I log in next time, use the search, the columns will still be there. Of course, this makes it easier to customize Cockpit to my needs, basically. Deleting process definitions has become more comfortable as well. So what I could always do was I could delete whole deployments. A deployment in Camunda can be a single process diagram, but it can also be a package. For example, when you deploy it as a WAR file with your JBoss or Tomcat application server. So there can be different process diagrams in there, different decision tables, maybe even form files and things like that, like in this example. So what I can do now is I cannot just delete a deployment, which will delete all the process and decision models in here, but only the respective version, since we have built-in versioning in Camunda. So I can not only do that, I can actually delete a specific process definition. Maybe I shouldn't do it right now. Let me just double check if there's anything else I want to show. No, I shouldn't do it right now. So I can click on this nice, charming paper bin here, and I will then delete the process definition, only this one process definition, including all previous versions of the definition. And if I pick Cascade, also, of course, all the instances that have been running on that definition. I can now inspect historic variables that have been deleted. What does that mean? It means that let's just assume that we have maybe we don't have any, well, right now actually running instances. Well, we can just try it out. So we have this instance here, which is technically running but currently pending in an incident state. We have certain variables here, which, by the way, already tells me what the problem was about, because I forgot to tell Cockpit that it should use the initial values of the variables. So this is why this didn't work. And what I can do now is, for example, I can simply delete a variable. So now it has been deleted. And when I look at the history state of this process instance, I can still see that variable. I can see that it has been deleted, but I can still see the last value and also the previous values if I want to of that variable. So this is, of course, also convenient. Can't show it right now, but I can basically see, when I have sub-processes that are called from my parent process, what is the current state, when did it start, when did it end, when I look at it like in a historical fashion, things like that, and the number of incidents I just mentioned, and many, many more of those, smaller features. So just trying to get across the idea of building a Cockpit without, simply putting too many features in it. So we're very careful about the user experience here in order to make Cockpit still a pleasure to use, basically. All right, so much about Cockpit. So what is Spring Boot Starter? Why should I care? And what's about Camunda here, Daniel?
Yeah, the Spring Starter, Spring Boot Starter, actually. So this is like Spring Boot is gaining more and more popularity, or has been gaining more and more popularity over the last years. And basically, Spring Framework solved this problem of how can we, in a very simple, straightforward, and lightweight way, implement enterprise applications, web applications in Java. And then Spring Boot brings in this very simple, straightforward deployment model. So we don't package large ears or WAR files that we deploy to maybe a heavyweight application server, but the Spring Boot allows you to bundle everything up in a plain jar file and then start it basically in a very microservice-oriented fashion. So Spring Boot Starter, as a community project, has been around for a couple of well, years actually. So it started in June 2015. So since June 2015, there has been a Spring Boot starter for Camunda BPM. It has been developed by the community, primarily by those two guys on top here, Oliver Steinhauer and Jan Galinski. And they've put a lot of work into it to make it really easy to use Camunda BPM in a Spring Boot application. And it has received quite a few stars on GitHub as well. And more of our users and customers approached this and they said, hey, this is really nice. We're actually using Spring Boot. We want to use it more in the future. And can you guys officially support the Spring Boot starter? And at some point we said yes, because there was a significant number of users wanting to do this. And so Jan was so nice to come visit us in August. So this is Jan on the left-hand side and our developer Svetlana, who is then taken over ownership together with her team to work on the Spring Boot starter here at Camunda. We streamlined many things, we simplified it, added more features, and so out of this comes now the officially supported Spring Boot starter extension. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to try to do my best at demoing this for you. So I'm going to build a simple application to just show you how easy it is with the Spring Boot starter to build Camunda application. So the first thing we're going to do is create a regular Maven project. I'm going to do this in Eclipse. I'm going to give it a group ID. Spring Boot starter demo. I'm going to create this, and now I have a fairly standard, so this is a naked bare bones Maven project. There's no dependencies in there, there's nothing. And now I'm going to show you that we have this. So if you want to do this yourself, if you want to do this at home, you can go to our Get Started tutorial, and we have this new Spring Boot Get Started tutorial, which explains the project setup. So the first step I have already done. And what I'm now going to do is I'm going to add the necessary dependencies to my POM file. This is quite straightforward. If you have used Spring Boot in the past, you are familiar with this. So let's take a look what we have. First of all, of course, we're importing the Spring Boot BOM file here. This gives us all the versions of the Spring Boot libraries that we're depending on. Then we're just adding the Camunda Spring Boot starter. This is the web app distribution, so I'm going to explain this a little bit more later. There's different starters. This one is the full one, which gives you the engine, the REST API, and the web application. And then we add a database. We could add other database drivers here. It would be automatically configured. So this is the first step. As a second step, all I need to do, and this is also not Camunda specific, but just boilerplate Spring Boot org Camunda demo shall be this package, and then we create our main application class. So let's call it my app for my application. And then we need to annotate this with Spring Boot application. And this is gonna annotate this as a regular Spring Boot application. I need to apparently do something here. My editor is freezing. I always need to use Windows for these presentations. So I apparently have a problem here. Here we go. So this took a little bit of time. Main method here, and then we just go and say Spring application .run, and then my app class, and then the arguments that are passed through. So this isn't even Camunda specific. This is just what is needed to do a Spring Boot application. Actually, this is all you need to do. So we can run this. Here we are. And as we can see, this is starting, and it should be finished in a second. And then we can point our browser to my local host, and then we should be able to see the Camunda web application. Here we are. All right. Now here, this is the bare bones Camunda web application. I haven't connected it to any LDAP repositories of users. It's using the database for storing users. This would now ask me to create the initial admin user, which is of course very handy for initial setup. But if I use it in development, then I would, every time I restart my application, I would have to create this user. So in the Spring Boot project, there is actually a very simple way of doing it. So you can actually create an application.yaml file, and there is a feature that has been built in that allows you just to predefine this initial user. So application.yaml, and it's really simple to do. So we go camunda.bpm, and then we go admin user, and then we say, okay, the ID of the user should be demo, and the password should also be demo, and then maybe the first name could be Camunda, why not? And now when we restart the application, we should see that the user is already there, and this saves up on development time or round trip. So I restart my application, and not every time I want to create this initial user. It's really a simple thing. It's quite straightforward, but it gives me a nicer developer experience. So let's check whether this worked. Very nice. So this time I'm not asked to create a user. I can just log in with my demo user, and then I can go into task list, and there I am. Now, here it's also very easy to add a BPMN process. For this, I'm going to use the Camunda modeler. I'm going to create a new BPMN diagram. It should have a service task. And we want to call a Spring Bean. And then also maybe a user task. I don't know. Do work. And there we go. Now, this one, we're going to configure it to use a delegate expression, and all we need to do is we need to add the name of a Spring Bean or Spring component that we're going to create right afterwards. So let's just call it Spring component right here, and then we're going to save this, and this goes into workspace, and then Camunda Spring Boot starts a demo, and diagram2.bpmn, why not? So I call this Spring component. If I want this to work, then I can create a new Spring Bean, call this Spring component, and then I just annotate this with the, this is not Camunda specific again, this is just Spring, and and this will now implements Java delegate, and here we are. This is a Camunda specific interface that requires us to implement an execute method, and this is not a callback that we're going to get from the process engine, from the Camunda engine, as it passes through this initial service task. So we can wire this up, and then we can say system out, and then maybe we go for execution get variable, name. All right. That should be all I have to do. So let's refresh to make sure the diagram is here. Let's stop. Let's restart. This is so much faster on Linux.
I'm so glad that we, like this, there can't be a Camunda webinar without code, you know? You have to show code.
All right, here we are, localhost, and I can log in again, demo, and then go into task list, and we should see our initial process. We didn't give it any name, and so variable name, string Camunda, and then start. And now if everything worked well, then then here on the console we can see the output Camunda. So this is what my service task here printed to the command line. So to summarize, it's really easy to set this up. So all we do is we add a couple of dependencies. We do the regular setup for that we would do for any Spring Boot application, and then we can just drop BPMN files into our workspace, into the class path of the application, and then from the BPMN files we can use Spring components. And this is quite easy to do and very nice for people who use Spring Boot. To give you a little bit more information, there, as I said, there's this getting started tutorial that takes you through the steps that I did here. There is then also proper documentation. So if we go to user guide and then Spring Boot integration, then again here you would also find a Maven dependency. You can also see that there's actually 3 different dependencies. So there is the first starter, which is the process engine proper, nothing else, so only the process engine. Then if on top of that you need a REST API, then you can go with the starter REST. And then again on top of that, if you also want to have the Camunda web application with cockpit and task list inside the same application, then you can go with the starter web app. You can use the Spring Boot starter with different versions of Camunda. There is a version compatibility table here, which shows you which version of the Spring Boot starter can be used with which version of Camunda BPM. And if you are Enterprise Edition customers, then there is also a different starter for the web app, the web app EE. This would pull in the web application with the additional Enterprise Edition plugins. So for example, some of the features that Jakob has demoed, like the batch operations that are only available in the Enterprise Edition, then also come with this starter. All right. I have also collected these links here on the slide, so if you want to revisit this later, you can get to those guides and tutorials through those links. Also on GitHub, and this is also linked from the slides that I created, we have some more examples showing you how to use the Spring Boot starter in different scenarios. All right, that should be it. Back to you, Jakob.
Yeah, thank you. Back to our audience, really. So I will quickly grab the screen and look at our next topic, which is in fact the Q&A session. So there have been some questions coming in already that we can look at, and there's probably more coming in. So very quickly, looking at the very first one that has reached me. So someone asked us if 24-hour fitness is actually using the Community Edition or the Enterprise platform, and if yes, Enterprise, why? So the first answer is easy. Yes, they're using the Enterprise platform. So they are a paying customer. This is not, that's not the reason why we showcase them here. So when you visit our website and you look at the case studies section, there's also organizations using the open source edition, so like NASA, for example, for missions. So you can look at their presentation from the last Community Day. So that's fine. You can use the Community platform, of course. So why would they use, for example, the Enterprise platform and those other 170 customers? You can find the reason also on the website. So it's a typical thing about, of course, support and maintenance when you're running mission-critical processes and you do not have a big developer staff that is super sophisticated in Camunda and can be available on duty also 24/7, 365 in case of production issues. Then, of course, we want this reassurance, and besides that, with the Enterprise platform come additional features, not just the Optimize as an entirely additional application, but also the Enterprise Cockpit. And when you visit the website, you can also look at the specific differences of the open source cockpit versus the Enterprise Cockpit. So so this is where you can get informed about that additional value, to answer that question first. So then I'm not sure if you can see the question yourselves or if I should read them. Yeah? Anything you want to answer?
Yes, I can see them, and there is a couple of, I think, very interesting questions. If it's okay with you, Jakob, I'm going to walk through them, and then I'm going to take those that are more related to features and more related to technical aspects. And there's also some inquiring about support or consulting, and then maybe to those people we can get back to as a follow-up. So the first one is, I have some doubts about process instance history time to live. Can you explain it for us? And this is by Edgar. And so the history time to live is a feature that has been introduced with Camunda 7.7, so not this release, but the release previous to it. What is it about? If we run many process instances, at some point they're finished, and we have this nice history that gives us the audit log and everything related to the process instances. The problem with this is that it grows over time, of course. And then the database needs to store a lot of data, which can make queries slow. It consumes a lot of disk space, memory, and so on. And it will slow down things like queries, and then you may want to get rid of this data. The good news is always that most people don't need this data to be around forever. So, for example, I was visiting a telco customer of ours yesterday, and we were talking about this as well. And I asked them, so for how many days do you actually need the data to be in this database? For how many days you need it to be present in Cockpit? And they said, well, 30 days. We're going to archive it to data warehouse anyway, but in Cockpit we need to have it for 30 days. So what does the history time to live allow you to do? Jakob is showing it here. So you go into process definition, and then you say, for this process definition, I want history to exist for 30 days for all process instances that have finished. This means that if a process instance finishes, then we set the clock. After 30 days, it gets deleted from history. Also, which we haven't shown before, while this feature in the engine has been present since 7.7, with the 7.8, this view here is new, and this gives you some overview of the history cleanup. So what we see is that for the MQL process, we have defined history time to live 30 days. We see that there's 3 instances finished, 0 are cleanable. So they are not 30 days past their expiration date, so to say. If they were, they would be cleanable. Then they would be cleaned eventually. And then there is the metrics chart at the bottom that in Jakob's demo now shows nothing because there's nothing to show. But this would show you then over time the amount of data or the amount of process instances and so on deleted. So with this, you can get more, again, control and monitoring into the history cleanup features. Now I'm going to go to the next question. So the next question is, so this is more about consulting. You may have mentioned this, but not sure I understood why the MySQL performance did not go up with the new Camunda batch insert for processes. This is by John. So actually, we haven't investigated very deeply. We are to make this possible. So the batching of statements in the 7.8 that we are now using is actually a feature that database drivers offer. So the JDBC database driver standards that are defined by Java itself give you the possibilities to batch these statements. We are now using those possibilities, but just because the API is there doesn't mean that every driver also implements this API in a way that it actually does the batching underneath the covers. Our current assumption is that in the MySQL driver simply doesn't do the batching. This can, of course, be a configuration issue. So maybe it can be configured to do this batching. I would invite you to investigate this a little bit if you need it. And then if you find out that it actually can do the batching, then maybe you can report about this in the forums so that other users can take advantage of it. The customers that triggered us to build this feature are actually using Oracle, and another one is using DB2. And I think, if I remember correctly, another was on Postgre. So we primarily focused on those databases, and for the MySQL, we actually give the batches to the driver, but then we currently suspect that the driver isn't actually giving the statements as batches to the database. All right, then we have another question by another John, And this is, does the process restart retain all the runtime variable data from the previous instance? Yes. So this was about the was it the restart of process instances? So I have a finished process instance that I want to relive, and actually what it does, the finished process instance is going to stay where it is, but what it does is it's going to create a new one. You can then say, give it the same business key. You can say, give it the same data that the original one had, but then it will be a new process instance on its own. And this also means that all the history related to the finished process instance is still there and can still be inspected. Then we have another question here. For suspension by same person, are in-flight service tasks allowed to complete before suspension of the sequence flow that the service task is on? The answer is no. So if you suspend it, then it will be suspended the moment you suspend it, and if there is an in-flight transaction, then there's a race between this transaction and the suspension. One of them will win, and the other one will roll back. So you cannot wait for this transaction to finish. So the answer to that is no. Another user is asking about, we are using Camunda 7.7 with Spring Boot with no problems. Should we upgrade to 7.8 because of the official support? Well, you should always upgrade to 7. Like at some point, you should always upgrade to the latest version to benefit of bug fixes and new features that are in there. Regarding the Spring Boot starter, a lot of things have been streamlined. There's some features that have been added. You can inspect the release notes of the latest release in GitHub, and there you should see the exact delta of the things that have been added with the newest version of the Spring Boot starter. And then, of course, you can look into whether those additions are of any benefit to you or not. Will the presentation video be made available for playback? The answer is yes. We have, does Camunda have some kind of dashboard where we can generate reports from workflows? I think, Jakob, this is a very good question that you can answer.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, it sounds like a stage question, but it's a real one, in fact. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. So yes, there's this thing called Optimize that is also here on the website. So Optimize is it's a web application that is about creating beautiful reports, arranging them in dashboards for business monitoring, also about alerts, and also detailed analytics to identify bottlenecks. So when you check out the screencast here, you will learn about that particular feature, which is quite nice. So you can try out Optimize yourself, part of the enterprise platform, so also part of the free trial that you can get via the website. You will see there in Optimize 1.5 that you can do all those bottleneck analytics already in the BPMN with the heat map feature, for example. In terms of the reports and dashboards, there's a preview. However, it's not yet fully GA released, so we are working on that, but you can expect that very soon. If you're interested in that, want to give it a try already, a test drive, please just reach out to us, contact us via the website, and we're very happy to demonstrate that. Daniel, I think we need to wrap it up. Or is there one question or two that you really want to answer that is left?
Yeah, one last one. Do you use transactions for batching? The answer is yes. Optimistic locking is in there as well. Is SQL Server 2017 on Linux supported as persistence option in EE? Currently not. You can request that. And that is it. So I think those are the most important questions right now. You can always ask more questions in the community forums, forum.camunda.org, and then we are happy to answer more of those. So I think I will just say goodbye from my side. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for attending, and see you next time.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time and attention from my side as well. And it would be great meeting you one day. So maybe at one of our meetups or community days or our user conference. Just drop us a line if you would like to meet up somewhere or like to discuss your Camunda use case. So yeah, besides that, enjoy your day and speak to you soon. Bye-bye.